The Entrepreneur's Library, episode 79.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library, the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book that will enable you to grow personally and professionally. Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
Welcome back to the Entrepreneur's Library. Today we have Todd Kashdan, author of The Upside of Your Dark Side: Why Being Your Whole Self, Not Just Your Good Self, Drives Success and Fulfillment. Welcome, Todd, and thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Library.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here.
Will you take just a moment to introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about you personally?
Sure. I am Dr. Todd Kashdan. I'm a professor of psychology at George Mason University, a senior scientist at the Center for the Advancement of Well-Being here, and I'm an author of, now it's 4 different books.
Will you give us a quick plug? What are those other books that you wrote about?
So the first book I wrote was with HarperCollins, Curious, ? Discover the Missing Ingredient to Fulfilling Life. And then I wrote a book on designing positive psychology, which was really what's the future of the science of understanding well-being. Then last year I wrote a book called Mindfulness, Acceptance, and Positive Psychology, which was how can you take the best practices and implement them in your lives, in your relationships, in the workplace. And now here I am with a brand new book that's not even a month old. It's called The Upside of Your Dark Side: Why Being Your Whole Self, Not Just Your Good Self, Drives Success and Fulfillment.
Perfect. So thank you for taking the time to share those other ones with us as well. Now let's jump right into that book that you just talked about, your newest one, The Upside of Your Dark Side, which was just made available for purchase on September 25th, 2014. And Todd, we're going to move quickly, but we're going to cover the top questions that our reader/listener wants to get answered. And the first one is, what was the inspiration behind writing The Upside to Your Dark Side?
Well, my co-author and I have been studying the science of happiness, love, and creativity and relationships for about 15 years. And both of us has read numbers of books that our colleagues have written about how to integrate this in the workplace and people's lives. And we've always been dissatisfied with, there's the science of what makes people happy, what brings people fulfillment, how can you bring purpose and meaning into people's lives, how do you motivate people? And all of it seemed to be divorced from the fact is in the real world, you're talking about lots of uncertainty, lots of complexity, lots of economic upturns and downturns, and a future that you can't predict. And a lot of these strategies in terms of forgiving people, making sure to be compassionate towards other people, making sure to be kind and generous with your time is not always universally the best situations, the best ways to behave across all situations you're involved in. And we thought that people are just ignoring and prematurely discarding some of the most important tools in their arsenal, which is things that are often uncomfortable and things that are often socially undesirable. You don't talk about at your barbecue or at happy hour about how you've been extremely narcissistic and selfish during the week. But often in certain predictable ways, it's exactly the way you want to behave to get the best possible outcome for your life and also for the health of your relationships. And we wrote this book to rectify what do you need to do to flourish and function optimally, love, work, and play in a world where we're overwhelmed, we're surrounded by people, some we like, some we don't like. And this is 15, 20 years of science pulled together in one book.
Excellent. So going based on what you just said, as far as the world being overwhelmed, I think entrepreneurs are overwhelmed as well. And even trying, again, why we made this podcast, finding their next great book. And so with that being said, there's tons of books that come out every single month on topics that have to do with entrepreneurship or leadership and all kinds of different topics. But what makes your book different from others regarding a similar topic?
Sure. Well, one, there are very few books out there on this topic, which is what are the benefits of some of your so-called negative emotions, some of the personality traits that we often despise and say that these are putrid things for someone to act like. You're talking about elements of narcissism. You're talking about Machiavellianism. You're talking about selfishness. You're talking about deviating from kindness and generosity. And what really separates this book from the other ones that are out there is very simple, which is it's couched in scientific research in economics, in philosophy, in sociology, in psychology, and in business and marketing. And we've got hundreds of studies. Most of it is not conducted by us, synthesizes together. And so you've got a scientifically based strategy for how to get the best of your personality in the difficult situations and the pleasurable situations to get the most rewards in our lives.
So Todd, based on the way that you guys wrote this book, how would you want the reader to engage? Is this a book that they should really start from the beginning and finish all the way through? Or is it one they can jump in and cherry pick different information, jump back out?
It's a good question. Being that we've had about 3 weeks of reader feedback, I can say that most people say it's a very breezy read. And I think the reason for that is both of us are natural storytellers. And so we don't just present the science in the boring way that all of us have been taught organic chemistry and biology when we were freshmen in college. We're telling you stories about Navy SEALs. We're telling you stories about Olympic marathon runners. There's stories of entrepreneurs and stories of people that almost got into a fist fight at a Vietnamese restaurant at 3:00 in the morning in San Francisco. And those stories illustrate the points that actually the science backs up. And I think the best way to read this book is to read it from chapter 1 and walk your way through. But honestly, it's sectioned in a way where if you want to understand of why a sense of mindlessness might be beneficial for you, just jump to chapter 5 right away. And if you want to understand really quickly what on earth are we talking about, why Teddy Roosevelt is a model for how we should behave and how we're afraid to behave like Teddy Roosevelt, just jump right to chapter 6.
Perfect. So Todd, this is my favorite part of the entire interview. And that's where I really like to hand over the mic and have you just, take a deep dive into the content. So we have a little bit of that. You just told us the inspiration, some differentiators, and then, how you want them to engage. So we know a little bit of the background behind the book, but now we'd like to take a deep dive into the content. And so a lot of our entrepreneurs are right now, they're out walking, they're on their drive to the office, on the way back from the office, and their goal is to figure out if your book is their next great read. So can you take the next 5 to 10 minutes and really take us through your creation?
Sure. One of the most important premises of the book is Robert and I just got back from Dubai, where we work with Standard Chartered Bank, to giving a 5-day workshop about how to improve morale, productivity, leadership, well-being in and out of the workplace. And one of the most important messages that we discovered of even working with them is if you ask people what's their fundamental objective in life, 80 to 90% of people will say it's to be happy. And we're writing a book to saying is it's actually a problematic life objective, is that there's no direct way to flip a dial, flip a switch, turn a dial to increase our happiness, to have more equanimity, to have more tranquility. And I think entrepreneurs are actually quite aware of this. And the best strategy to live a life well lived is to have an attitude where you're present with an attitude of curiosity and you're constantly plugging away and doing what matters. And on the way, sometimes you catch happiness and sometimes you don't. And there's a couple of things that we've learned in psychology that we illustrate in this book, which is from an evolutionary perspective, tens of thousands of years, we have developed negative emotions because they aid our survival and they help us get success in our life. And we have prematurely discarded the benefits of these negative emotions because they don't feel – nobody wakes up saying, when am I going to get my dose of pain? And yet what we've uncovered is – I'll take anger for an example. We know that the majority of men will describe that anger is the emotion that they have the most difficulty with and it causes the most problems in their relationships. And yet – if you look at the research, there are very specific, predictable situations where anger is beneficial. If you are in negotiations with somebody that's conflictual, they're argumentative, they don't share your values, they're coming onto the table with incredible, vigorous attacks towards the things you care about and the things you want, and they're not compromising, what we know is kindness and lollipops and smiles and happiness is not as effective as well-expressed anger. And we're not talking about rage. We're talking about letting people know you're pissed, you're annoyed, you're frustrated. They're doing things to you that are disrespectful. When you don't express that anger, you are less likely to get the percentage of the pie in those negotiations that you want. So that's a clear, objective outcome. Now, here's one other important point I want to talk about, which is when people think about anger, expressing it, they get really worried that they're going to ruin relationships. And one thing that entrepreneurs, like everyone else on the planet, is they don't want to cut ties because you never know when you're going to need somebody. Well, if you look at thousands of episodes of anger, researchers have found that in 74% of anger episodes, people will say that someone expressing anger towards them because they felt that they were doing something wrong. If you express anger to me, 74% of the time, I will recognize the faults in my behavior or in the way that I communicate towards you. And when you express your anger, the target of your anger is more likely to say that the relationship has been strengthened than weakened. 45% of people after having anger expressed towards them say that the relationship was strengthened in the long term, and only about 30% of people will say it was weakened. And so some of our assumptions about the problems with negative emotions just don't fall true when you actually look at scientific evidence. Let me take another negative emotion that we detail in the book in terms of its benefits. If you think about anxiety, one thing that entrepreneurs are known for is having a tremendous amount of optimism, lots of positive emotions, lots of vigor, lots of excitement, and anxiety, but it's often they want to squelch or hide their anxiety. And I want to say that anxiety by itself you can think of it as a latent superpower that we ignore. If you go on to a vacation and you're the type of person, because entrepreneurs are like this, the ones that go on virtualtourist.com and find the greatest adventures, the most exciting restaurants, the best waterfalls to go to, places to go caving and spelunking. That person is a great person to have on a vacation. And we often ignore the benefit of the other person that comes, who reminds you for the 30th time, are you sure that your passports haven't expired? Are you sure you brought enough sunscreen? Are you sure you brought a baseball cap? Are you sure you brought long sleeve shirts, even though we're going to Nicaragua and we're expecting incredibly warm temperatures, just in case you want to go out at nighttime and walk around the city? That person we often view as annoying, unhelpful, and a killjoy. And really, when you actually explore people's vacations and their travels, and you explore business ventures, and you explore teams that are the most functional and optimal in terms of moving creative ideas to market, to bring creativity to innovation, those peoples have what we call the Sentinels, the anxious, cautious person on the team that will check out what are the regulatory rules we haven't paid attention to? What are our competitors doing that we should be worried about? Often people that are not optimistic, that aren't full of positive emotions, but they're exactly the type of person that you want on your team, which is the Sentinel is thinking of, they're hoping for the best, but they're expecting the worst, and they're thinking of all the different possibilities of where things could go wrong so that you can imagine them, work through them, and so it doesn't actually happen. And without that person, this is where you have organizations that go bust. You have products that don't make it to market, and you've got what a lot of people call our unicorns, which are amazing ideas, the things we fall in love with, but they have no chance of making it in the real world because you haven't thought through about the capital, the production, the marketing plan, or whether consumers will potentially be aware of why they should fall in love with the same thing that you fell in love with. And so for the first part of our book, we talk about there are benefits, very strategic benefits towards these negative emotions. And instead of trying to categorize and label our emotions as these are the good ones, they're positive, joy, love, gratitude, interest, intrigue, inspiration. And these are the negative ones: boredom, anxiety, anger, disgust, even contempt, guilt, shame. And instead think of your emotional repertoire as what's useful or not useful for the exact situation that I'm in. And this is just a really short description of our focus on not being more positive or happy, but being emotionally agile. And that's kind of the first part of the book. And then the next part of the book, we move to another form of agility, which is social agility. And this is, there are plenty of books that talk about, you think about the great book by Adam Grant, Give and Take, and being kindness and generous and compassionate, which is, the Dalai Lama is talking about this, the Pope is talking about this. Steve Jobs, when he was giving that the Stanford commencement speech, on top of talking about curiosity, he's talking about being a compassionate, loving person that gives to the world. But part of being a giver, part of making a contribution to the world is also to recognize the value of the sides of your personality that deviate from generosity and kindness. There is a place for narcissism. The entrepreneur that does not have a grandiose vision of why they want to make a change in the world, what that change is going to be, and why they think they are the perfect catalyst for that, they're not going to get angel investor funding. They're not going to convince people that why should I invest in you over another person? And so as long as grandiosity is matched by effortful actions to make progress towards the small steps to get to that grandiose vision, there's nothing wrong with it. A striving for supremacy, which is one of the components of narcissism, is fundamental to making traction towards big aspirational goals. And we walk you through exactly what those steps are. And if you think about the current business climate, which is the majority of people are going to be working in 7 to 10 companies over the course of their career, and that's probably an understatement since 2008 and the economic collapse. And when you think about the vast number of workers are actually free agents that are hired for temporary periods, you're talking about computer programmers, you're talking about market analysts, you're talking about people that are doing, website analytics. They're not going to be your long-term employees. They're going to be in there in a short time period. In this type of environment where we hire consultants and experts to come onto our team for short periods of time, narcissism works extremely well to get traction, get allies, and form a strong, confident tribe in the face of adversity and difficulties, which is part of every single business venue and every type of relationship. Narcissistic people are great with their charisma, their desire for admiration, and the striving for supremacy that they get people excited. And in the beginning phases of an organizational product and an organization, you want those people to take the podium and get people excited. You want people to be motivated. You want people to put in as many hours as they can because they believe in the vision of an organization and their products. And when we divorce ourselves and give up narcissism because we say, this is a bad quality, this is a vice, you are losing some of the weapons that are in your arsenal to be more successful and fulfilling in your life. And another characteristic we talk about, and we use Teddy Roosevelt as the exemplar in a chapter that we call the Teddy effect, which is psychopathy. We're not talking about everything that involves Dexter from Showtime in terms of becoming a serial killer. We're not talking about someone that's going to steal money from their grandparents so that they can buy drugs at 3 o'clock in the morning. One of the elements of psychopathy that we're talking about that's beneficial is fearless dominance, is the willingness to be bold with your decisions, knowing that 20 to 30% of people will disagree with you. And in an online world where people can put anonymous posts about your blog, about your article, about your product, about you, about your organization, and review things on Yelp and kill your restaurant, in this world, you need to be bold enough and fearless enough that I am going to accept that 20% of people will not like what I'm going to do. And if I get lower, negative ratings than that, than 20%, I should be worried that I might not be doing something that's exciting enough and original enough and creative enough. I might not be pushing the world forward enough. Like, if you're getting 100% likability, you are giving up some of that creativity. By definition, creativity is going against the status quo in some way to do something different and do something with it from a different perspective. Some people are going to get upset because they enjoy stability and order. You're breaking that order. That's the defining feature of creativity. The other part of it, it's you're breaking the status quo and you're doing something useful. And so Teddy Roosevelt is one of the top 5 most highly rated presidents by historians in terms of his ability to make progress, whether it was pushing towards combat and war or whether it was making diplomatic decisions to increase peace and reduce conflict. Whatever the aim was, this was a person with fearless dominance and incredibly narcissistic tendencies. And this is someone that would go hunting in the middle of North Dakota while the Senate is in session because he needed a mental break to gather his energy and resources for the next few months. And if people had an important decision that needed to be made, they would come out to North Dakota to see him. And in today's world, in 2014, a president would not have that attitude because they'd be obsessed with Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and Time Magazine approval ratings, as opposed to what's the behavior necessary to get the best possible outcome in the situation that I am. And so we walk through those parts of your personality that might not be socially attractive to talk about, but actually are exactly what you need every once in a while. And we talked about as social agility is, most of the time you want to be generous, kind, and loving. But let's just say that 20% of the time, if you want to make things work, you need to deviate. If you're a parent and you decide that I'm going to be kind, loving, and generous 100% of the time, your kid will not have the psychological functioning and emotional intelligence skills of someone that provides structure by expressing anger when appropriate and laying down the line with dominance of these are the rules that are part of this household. When you disagree with them and you break them, there are going to be consequences. It doesn't make me happy. I know it doesn't make you happy now. But this is what brings structure and a highly functioning household. And what we know from the psychology of studying children over the course of time is they will tell their parents, I don't like rules. I don't like having a bedtime. I don't like being told what I have to eat. I don't like being told that dinner is always at 5:30 and we all have to sit together. I like having freedom. But when you talk to them in the longer term, they say that I like to have some bit of structure because the world is so complicated and new to me. They're learning new subjects. They're learning how to talk to people from the opposite sex. They're just starting to understand what it means to be a sexual being. They're trying to understand and learn all these new sports where people are booing at them or cheering at them, and everything seems to be on the line in every social interaction. What's it like to be lonely? How do I prevent myself from being rejected? They want some place where there's some level of structure. So while they might feel uncomfortable and actually put some pushback, when you are dominant as a parent, it's a fundamentally important part of developing kids with emotional intelligence who are going to feel good about themselves, lifelong learners, and good leaders. And it's the same thing when we try to be creative in our work world. It's one of those paradoxes. To be creative, to create a culture where people are going to share unique, bizarre, unusual ideas, they need structure first in terms of what's the general idea of what we're trying to do. And if you hand people a blank piece of paper and ask them a broad abstract question such as, what are the 3 cool ideas you have for our company for the next 5 years? You're not going to get as much creativity if you get more specific and concrete in terms of, all right, we want to create new televisions that in some way allow people to feel as if they're part of the programming, where they can feel that all 5 senses are able to be activated and part of their experience. What creative ideas do you have? And that second one, with a little bit of structure, you're going to get more creativity. And so here's a section of the book that we talk about this importance of social agility, that I could be kind sometimes, but sometimes I have to be quarrelsome. I could be warm sometimes, and sometimes I have to be cold and dismissing. And if we cannot, our brains are not designed to have 100% friendships with every single person that we interact with. Our brains do not have the mental capacity to hold that many friendships. And what I'm going to suggest, which is part of what we talk about in the book, is you want to be kind, but you want to be selective. And your time and energy is the most valuable currency you have. So how can you start saying no? With authority, with dominance, with fearlessness, knowing that it'll upset some people. And part of this is about tolerating the distress that comes with making the tough decisions, getting through the stressors, and dealing with people that you might not like as much and are obnoxious, annoying, and difficult, but are necessary characters to work with to get through and navigate everyday life. So we've got emotional agility, we talk about social agility, and we talk all about the science that's behind this. So this book is not our opinions. This is not an op-ed. And in the third part of the book, we talk about mental agility, and that we have a society right now where there's an obsession with mindfulness being the panacea for everything. You've got NCAA, NBA basketball teams that are assigning mindfulness interventions to increase people's free throw percentage, to increase people's shooting capacity, increase their ability to find the other players when they want to make a great pass. And you've got businesses that are hiring consultants such as myself to come in there to do meditation and mindfulness workshops. And what we wanted to say in this third part of the book is, let's not ignore the fact that there are incredible benefits of mindlessness. And just in the name of time, I'm just going to go through one of them. And with a particular reference for entrepreneurs in the business world. We live in a very politically correct culture right now in the United States. And the issues of diversity are important. But the issues about diversity, it's not about having people of different skin color who look different around the table. We want diversity not as an end in itself, because by having people with different life histories and different backgrounds, I can see the world from different perspectives, and that enhances my performance and creativity. That enhances the team's performance and creativity. So how do we handle diversity? How do we talk about the wage gap between men and women? How do we talk about that there are racial and sexual orientation differences between people on the staff, and people have different biases about people that don't share their religious beliefs, their cultural beliefs, their norms about raising kids, their feelings about romantic partners? How do you create harmony so that we can perform well in a room full of people where everybody is so different? And one strategy is to be mindful, but actually there's research showing that the more mindful you are about other people's feelings when you're talking about difficult topics, it actually makes people feel alienated, and no one ever talks about the issues at hand. And so if you have people, if you're having a conversation about how women make 77 to 89 cents on the dollar for men for the same job and the same exact work, and men are talking to women and they're asked to be mindful as they're talking to each other, those people who are in that conversation, they're more uncomfortable, they're less likely to talk about what they really think about the issue, and the women in that conversation are more likely to say, I didn't feel as if I was heard, I thought that I was being brushed aside, and I wouldn't want to interact with that person again. And when people are told to be mindless, just impulsively say whatever it is you're thinking, try not to be polite, try to be real and authentic. And people are saying, they're going to the difficult things. They're talking about parts, reasons why they think maybe women shouldn't be making as much as men. It's leading to conflict. And the women are coming back and saying, I don't understand that. Convince me. Is there data to back up your point? And they're arguing. And if an outside person looks at that conversation, they say to themselves, wow, this isn't going well. But after those conversations where people are not told not to be polite, unless that's what you exactly how you want to behave, women are saying they felt more understood, they felt heard, they enjoyed the arguments that they had, they felt the person was actually more open-minded, and they were more likely to wanting to have another conversation, form a relationship with that person. Politeness and mindfulness often gets in the way. And sometimes we need to be impulsive and we need to be mindless and just let ourselves go and just do whatever it is we're thinking about. And if we do things that really upset people, we're allowed to make a mea culpa at any point in time. And I'm saying which is not to be impulsive all the time, just as you cannot, even if you spent 20 years mastering consciousness, you could not be mindful all the time. You're not going to be able to take your yoga mat from your yoga class at nighttime into the boardroom at the exact moment that someone turns to you and says, you know what? Stupidest idea I've ever heard. Give me something else. What else are you thinking about? Because that one I don't even want to hear about. In that moment, you're going to have an emotional reaction. It's going to be difficult to get your equanimity. Can you express your anxiety or your anger in that moment and be able to functionally continue that conversation without needing a pill, a moment to reflect, some time to yourself to gather your thoughts, to get your breath back? Can you be there and say, and just impulsively say, wow, I didn't expect such an angry reaction. I got to tell you, I feel a little bit disrespected right now. Maybe we can have this kind of conversation in a little bit different way in terms of what worked and what didn't. So when I give you this next idea, I can have some inkling of what you're talking about, because I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. And if you feel that, when you express that, it gives a clear message that people don't get to walk all over you, that you can take feedback, but there's a way to do it in a more healthy, effective manner. And when you don't say something, the relationship gets altered in a way that's not going to be healthy the next time you have a conversation. It's easier to talk about these things as they come up, as opposed to let them fester. Because when they fester, you have the tough conversations are not happening face to face. They're happening in the hallways as people gossip about each other. And that's how relationships and teams start to erode slowly and companies lose their mojo. So there's a benefit to deviating from mindfulness, to being present with your negative emotions, not trying to feel positive. And sometimes there's a need for impulsivity as opposed to this pure reflective mindset. And so that's and that's just a small piece of a very large topic of talking about the benefits of mindlessness and mental agility. And so it's a book about when we prematurely discard aspects of our personality because they're not comfortable. We've never been trained that this is what we should be like, and other people don't like to talk about them. We dismiss psychological strengths that are at our whim, and we give them away for nothing. And those people that are comfortable being whole, which means whatever part of their personality that arises for the situation to help that, they're willing to use those tools effectively to get the best possible outcome, to build the best relationships, to get the greatest performance, to work towards the greatest creativity. Those are the people who are going to accomplish more than the ones that only are going to be half human, focusing only on positivity and kindness.
Todd, thank you so much for taking us through that book, and what a relevant, even what you said from the beginning. I asked the question anyway, to ask you to differentiate when, and now that you've taken us through the book, I definitely have not read a book that does talk about tapping into that different side. And there's not a whole lot, so many books come out every single month that a lot of times it's just new content spun in a different way. And it's kind of crazy. Someone might say that this is not a people skill book, but you're going to learn a ton of people skills actually within this book. Most people skill books will talk about being generous, kind, and loving. But when it does come down to the real world, sometimes results come from directness, not being indirect, but directness. And sometimes you're going to have high volume conversations. So I think when I very first started a company a couple years back, 5-6 years ago, I thought that I could be generous, kind, and loving because that's who I like to be. And how I soon found out when dealing with other people that some people I can be, and they're very effective, and others it takes it takes maybe a lack of kind and loving sometimes. And like you said, even then the relationship and us moving forward moves ahead in the long run. And sometimes I think we focus on the short term, but this next question that I'm going to ask you is might seem somewhat difficult, but it's just because I've asked you to give us a bird's eye view, which you just did. Now I'm asking you to give us, the satellite view, and that's if the reader could only take away one concept or principle or action item out of everything that you just talked to us about, everything that you put in your book. Again, if they could only take away one concept, what would you want that to be?
That while we all want to have a high frequency of moments where we feel positive, we feel love, we feel compassion, we feel connected to other people, it's an important thing to know is that negative emotions, pain, and these other elements of our personality that aren't so comfortable, the stresses and difficulties and adversities that we go through, and the psychological tools that help us get through these stressors, difficulties, and adversities, these are the springboards to the highest peaks in our life. And it's important to recognize that we don't have to choose between feeling positive and feeling negative. I don't have to choose between healthy relationships and interactions where it's going to work for me in the immediate term and we're not going to develop a relationship because we just don't hit it off. We have to think more broadly in terms of not choosing between things, but can we have it all? Can we actually have all of these aspects of our personality in our arsenal such that whatever the situation pulls for, we can be ready, we can be strong, and we can be committed to making progress towards make progress towards what matters most to us. And the only way to do that is to be whole and present and accepting and even harnessing all the aspects of who we are and not prematurely discarding things because they make us uncomfortable.
So Todd, this is kind of a different kind of question because I would prefer it be one from you specifically and not from someone else, but I'll leave it up to you. And that's, do you have a favorite quote from your book? Something that you wrote that you think would resonate with your audience, or now that the book's been out for 3 weeks, is there something that you're getting back from people on Twitter or social media in general of something that's resonating with them that you can share with us?
Well, I'll do two. Let me give you a quote from someone else, and then I'll tell you what's resonated the most with people in terms of the current readers. And people can read the reviews have been quite satisfactory for us on Amazon and elsewhere. Nietzsche has a quote which is one of the inspirations of this book, which was, and my apologies if I actually screwed this quote up. The great epochs of our life are the occasions when we gain the courage to rebaptize our evil qualities as our best qualities. I'm just going to say that one more time because I know it's harder verbal than if you saw it on a screen somewhere. Yeah. The great epochs of our life are the occasions when we gain the courage to rebaptize our evil qualities as our best qualities. And it goes with it, which I think is the best part of the book to me, which we talk about, what would somebody do right now, today, with what I just described, which was there's benefits to anger. I didn't talk about the benefits of sadness and envy and guilt, which there are tons of those in the book as well, and the science behind them. And we talk about how do you introduce anger in an effective way to someone else? Because it's something particularly men in particular are worried about, and women are worried about because they often feel as I can do the exact same way of expressing anger as a man, and I'll be described as a bitch, which is we've heard this time and time again. through the workshops and the talks we've been giving on this book. And we talk about one of the ways of doing this is called what we call the discomfort caveat, which is when you start these conversations with someone that you feel is obstructing your goals, being disrespectful, being inappropriate to you or to your inner circle or your team, and you feel angry, is you let them know and you talk to them. You talk to them one-on-one. You don't talk to them in front of a room full of people to get crowd support. And you let them know, listen, this is really difficult for me to talk to you about some of these uncomfortable feelings that came up in the last social interaction we had. And I'm actually hesitant to even have this conversation. I'm wondering if we could have a candid talk with the two of us. Now, two things could happen there. So first of all, almost invariably, this is going to be honest, that it is uncomfortable to talk to your manager and say you feel as if they've been disrespectful, you feel that you're underpaid, you feel as if the company's going in the wrong direction. That's a tough conversation. So why not just admit that vulnerability? And what happens is, one, their defenses are going to come down because they can see, just like every other human being, you're vulnerable. You have a softer side. And then you can go into the stuff that bothers you. Now, let's say that they give you some resistance, which is like, you know what? I don't want any feedback. We had time for feedback before, and this is not time for a second feedback session. This is good information for you. You are now learning that this business relationship or this social relationship, if it happens outside of work, is not healthy. If you're going to come to someone and say something's bothering me and they want to tell you that I don't want to hear it, you're going to have to figure out, is this a relationship worth keeping? Is this a relationship where now I know that potentially I can't trust this person. This is not somebody I can rely on. That is amazing, useful information for all the future scenarios where you might need support for something difficult, or you might need support because something great happened to you, and are they going to be on your side cheering for you as you do something, as you accomplish something? And we only have a small number of people we can let into our wise counsel, our inner circle. And we should select wisely for this. And so when we open up these caveats about having it before we have a difficult conversation with someone, we get very useful information of, do they deserve to be in there? Or will I keep them close, like in The Godfather? Keep your friends close, keep your enemies even closer. But it's not to have a close personal relationship with them.
So Todd, you said when you first said the quote that sometimes it's difficult to remember that, through audio. And I appreciate you repeating it. And that's, we actually just revamped our show notes to actually allow people to, if they jump on your episode, they look at the show notes. We're going to have all this different kinds of information, links to some of the different things that you've been talking about. This next question, actually, that I'm going to ask you about a book. We'll have links to all of this so that that person that is running obviously is not going to remember that quote, but can jump back and take a look so that they can remember. And that does lead me in, this book I already know will be a paradigm shifting book for people because it is so different. And the next question is really, what is a book that created a paradigm shift for you that really impacted your life?
Well, I'll tell you a book I'm reading right now, which is having a profound influence on me. And I know that your readers, your listeners will love this book because it's perfect for entrepreneurs. And honestly, I read this. I said to myself, I wish I wrote this book. And that's usually the best compliment that I can give for an author. It's called Spent. And this is a book about what evolutionary psychology has to offer marketing. Whereas most people that are marketing, whether products or services, they're still stuck on, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We're focusing on where are they? Do we have to work on their self-esteem? Are we going to work on their social status? Are we going to work on, are they at the stage where they're focused on love? And that is an antiquated way of thinking about how do we motivate people and how do we get people to think about how this service or how this product will be of benefit to them. So this book, Spent, Sex, Evolution, and Consumer Behavior by Jeffrey Miller, it talks about if we gain a better understanding of what people are actually like, not what we want them to be or hope they are, we can learn better how to relate to people, how to persuade people, and how to influence people. And evolutionary psychology leads us to such great understanding of, which emotions, which triggers in the world, and which fundamental motives drive human behavior.
That's huge. We haven't had that one recommended before, so I appreciate that. And I'll have to pick that up myself. So, Todd, before we depart, can you recommend the best way for our listeners to not only get more information on you, but also your book, The Upside to Your Dark Side?
Sure. My name is my website, toddkashdan.com. TODDKASHDAN and .com. And I'm also on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn, everywhere, all over social media. But if you just, anyone who Googles my name will find, the recent articles about the book, some us discussing, what's, why this book is relevant to people for improving their lives in work, out of work, in their relationships. And just also I give away tons of free articles. All the science that I've been doing over the past 15 years is all freely available on my website.
Perfect. Well, Todd, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your book, your creation with us.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks again for listening in today. If you would like to get your hands on The Upside of Your Dark Side or any of the other resources mentioned by Todd, just look at the show notes at the elpodcast.com.
Looking for your next book idea? Head over to the elpodcast.com, where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free. That's the elpodcast.com. Till the next time, keep it on the EL.